All right, so this last panel discussion, this last session is it's pretty much just geared towards the practical side of everything. So we're taking everything from the last 2 days and we are wrapping it up in one movie quote. What's your movie quote? No, I'm just kidding. Now, Ken, I haven't heard you quote any movies yet, but I know these two guys have quoted some movies. I mean, these spiritual, what are you looking at? Oh, you can see, there's no bottom to that. Don't put your tongue on it. So I know last night you were quoting Zoolander at supper. I know you've quoted Major Payne. We won't go any further. Any favorite movie quotes before we?
I mean, it would be Rocky.
Rocky.
Yo, Adrian.
Of course, it would be Rocky. All right. Any other favorites before we jump in?
My favorite movie of all time is The Mission, which is nothing like Zoolander.
Oh, now you're going to get deep on us. Oh my gosh. I see how you're going to be. All right, then we're going to move on. All right, so you guys have offered tons of great advice on making disciples. So first question right off the bat, I just want to simply know, what is this one piece of practical advice of what not to do as we go back, as we get started, or as we continue in this ministry? What would you advise practically our people to not do when it comes to making disciples?
Okay, I would say building a discipling culture is a long walk in the same direction. So what I'm saying is don't try to quick fix a solution for making disciples. Just get started somewhere and then build a step at a time and let those steps kind of come into a sequence that doesn't scare everybody else that, oh my goodness, we're changing everything. Well, you're not. You're going to change everything by the cumulative impact of the long-term walk in the same direction.
So a lot of things you could talk about on that one particular question, but I think, and I've said this in a couple of my roundtables, don't make the mistake of thinking that a church with discipleship is the same thing as a disciple-making church. It is not. It is not the same thing. So a church with discipleship is a church that adds on discipleship to everything else that's already going on. And a church that is a disciple-making church realizes that that is all we do. From beginning to end, our whole focus and mission is to make disciples that look like Jesus by taking untrained people and helping them become fully trained. And it's a mistake to just see it as an add-on to everything else that you do, I think.
I would say don't be too rigid on any one thing, because your church is a unique expression. Your church is a unique expression of the body of Christ in your community. And if you're trying to replicate somebody else's formula to the T, it's probably not going to work for you. There's no formula. There's just revelation of what your specific, how your church is supposed to carry that out. So there's these patterns that work, right? There's systems that will work, but recognize if you get too rigid about that. I watched a church. I was part of a huge church, probably 40,000 people, and they went to Colombia and saw this disciple-making pattern. And they came back and they said, we're going to implement this here. They didn't consider the culture of Colombia being very different than the culture of San Antonio, Texas. And I watched them drive people insane, saying, this is how it's got to be. And I mean, they forced people into these really crazy, rigid systems they had come up with, not realizing we're going to have to figure out our unique expression of this with the body that we have of believers. And again, there's patterns and there's principles, but there is no formula. So that's what I would encourage you. Just don't get too rigid about it. And rigidity is where people start getting hurt, and you leave all these dead bodies in your wake in the name of the program. So.
I would just add to that a little bit they say methods always change, principles never do, So I would agree with that. And I would say lock in on the principles that Jesus used 2,000 years ago. So don't look at all of the different methods, but Jesus was as culturally relevant as anybody you'll ever meet. So Jesus was making disciples within his cultural context. And I totally agree with that. But I believe that those principles that you're talking about, you used a different word, right? No, you said principles.
Yeah,
Yeah. I believe that those principles are timeless.
that's true.
And I believe those principles will work as much today as they did 2,000 years ago.
The thing's wonderful about principles is it's not black and white thinking. It's simply saying, if you do this, you will get this. You know, the borrower is slave to the lender. You got to take out a loan sometimes. Yeah, you do, right? Sometimes you got to take out a loan, but just know you're going to be a slave to the dude that lent you the money. Jesus taught principles. If you do this, you will get this. You give, it will be given unto you. And that's where the principles come in that are just so important. So recognize that, and you can have that flexible in the context of the culture you're in, the people group that you're with, whatever it is. So, yeah.
All right. So considering the principles and the practices of making disciples and even helping a church body change their thinking, because I think that in our context, it's probably the similar where you guys are coming from. When you go into a church and you begin talking about discipling, when you talk about discipleship, just like you said, it's not that class. It's not just an hour-long class. What were or what have been some of the most practical helps as far as helping a church or even a group of people in that church change their thinking to actually turn the switch on from discipleship is what we do 5 to 6 p.m. on Sunday night to an all skate mentality? What has been one of the most helpful, practical things that you've seen in that process?
I'll jump in. So culturally, every church has, we talked about the social contract and what their expectations are, but that's based on what we do and what we show them. So as a leader walking people into a culture shift, what our goal is if we could just start by not announcing that we're making a huge shift, but start doing it, moving forward. What I want to say is Jesus didn't walk into a crowd and say, I'm going to teach you about disciple making right now. Everybody watch me. And when I move my hand like this, it's like when Billy Graham used to put the Bible over his, every preacher in America was suddenly putting the Bible over his whole hand. We're imitating specific things, but the reality is he just started doing it where he was. And if we can consider every conversation to be a disciple-making conversation, then all of a sudden you start finding people that will start to pursue what they're hearing from you, and then you have an opportunity to step into the lives of a few people. We used to say, hey, we want to do this by evolution, not revolution, because revolution gets bloody. We want to make sure that as what we're doing, ultimately, we would love the way that we engage mission as a church to be fully integrated with disciple-making principles of Jesus. And I think we miss it because we look at the words that he said, and it kind of blows us away because nobody said the things that Jesus said, and people would walk away just totally mystified. And we see the works, the miracles that he did, and we miss the ways in the gospel. So I would just say, if you encourage people to get in the gospels and not necessarily get tied into the words and the works, but look at what were his habits. And the habits of Jesus are pretty good habits to imitate. That's the only thing I would want to imitate.
Amen to that. I mean, 1 John 2:6, anyone who claims to live in him must walk as Jesus walked. So I think you're in pretty safe territory there. So, I would just add to that. And this is, I didn't come up with this. You've heard this, that language shapes culture, but leaders determine the language, right? So language does shape. Think about our world, and I'm not going to use any of it, but think about all of the language that's come out in the last year about what lives matter and things like, there's just a lot of language today that's shaping the culture we live in. Isn't that right? And so culture is shaped by language, but leaders determine what that language is. And so I think if we, as leaders, are speaking the right language, then that will slowly but surely over time. And that goes back to what we talked about last night, where you have to be leading toward mission. So your job is to point everybody in the same direction and in the right direction. And then you're also supposed to lead self first. So if you go back to what Scott just said, so you just need to start living it, and you just need to start being obedient to the Great Commission by yourself. And rather than going in and making it a promotion or a campaign, just start doing it. And it ought to just be a ripple effect out of your own life and ministry. It ought to just spill into everything else that happens. So,
Well, with what you said about leaders too, there are leaders in your life that have dropped something in you that you couldn't ever get rid of. And so when Ken's saying leaders get to choose the language that builds the culture, one of the leaders that poured into me for 2 years, he had all of these phrases. He had thought so much about the habits of Jesus that he had just a very descriptive way of saying things that were sticky. You would remember them, and they were powerful. And one of the things that he said was, hey, we do church hoping to get disciples. Jesus made disciples, and he got the church. And so that's powerful. People remember that, and it's a shifter. It can be a shifter in somebody's life. So be the leader that studies that and keeps moving it.
So we talk about the character of Christ and the conduct of Christ all the time, because that's why we define a fully trained disciple, is that they have the character of Christ and the conduct of Christ. So we use that language all the time. So what's interesting is that the conduct of Christ looks the same. The conduct and the character of Christ looks the same in every cultural context. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness. It looks the same in South America as it does North America, as the same as it does in the Middle East in 21st century or in first century. That's timeless, right? That doesn't change. I mean, love is love in every generation. That should be a song, right? Love is love in every generation or something, you know? So it could be a book. Yeah. So here's a great example. So we talk about all this all the time. So really, really good friend of mine, leader in our church, his father passed away a few weeks ago, and there's some family dynamics there that are really challenging and all that kind of stuff. And so he's about to go to the funeral, and he knows it's going to have some relational stress and relational tension in that service and that funeral. So he calls me and he says, "Man, I just need you to give me a little wisdom here." And he says, all I can think about is 2 words: character and conduct. Character and conduct of Christ. And I'm just sitting here going, dude, that's what you want. That guy's getting it, because that's not, I mean, he's just asking the question, how do I respond more like Christ in the midst of this difficult situation in my life? And I can't think of anything better for our church to be producing or being a part of producing. The Holy Spirit does the work, right? But I can't think of anything better than the Holy Spirit using our church to produce something in this man's life that's going to come out at one of the most darkest, deepest, challenging times in his life. So language shapes all.
All right, then let me pick up on something that Scott was saying. The people that invested in you, they had tools, they had a method, they had something that they invested in you. What was it?
This is crazy because everything just kind of came full circle last weekend. Something happened in my life. My mentors came and heard me speak for the first time. They've been my mentors for 25 years. They came and heard me speak at a church I'm filling in for in Florida. And the book they took me through was Experiencing God, Blackaby. And the crazy thing is, the stuff I was sharing, they're like, "Do you realize what you were sharing was experiencing God?" And I was like, "Oh my gosh, 25 years ago, that got poured into me by them. And here I was communicating it to this crowd." And it was just a wild kind of convergence of things to me. But David and Karen Nicholson, they've been, since I was 17, they were like, just kind of scooped me up and they're like, "Come here. You're a wild horse here, a wild stallion," right? But It's a Bill and Ted quote.
You were a drummer. So
That's right, yeah.
Obviously.
And they scooped me up, and I remember sometimes I'd come up with crazy things, and they'd be like, "That's dumb. You're wrong." I'd be like, "Oh, thanks." But I wanted somebody to shoot me straight like that. And 25 years they've been in my life, and I called them before every major decision. I mean, literally, I call them on all sorts of things, and they're still. It's kind of funny because I'm actually getting to put into their life now as they're going to a new phase, and I'm saying, "Here's some things I've seen down the road." And it's a weird thing that shift that happens. But yeah, David and Karen Nicholson started with experiencing God. They still use that book to this day with all their discipleship groups.
All right. Before you two jump in there on this, let me just point out, this is something I think for a lot of our folks, as they begin to understand this culture shift and this mind shift, that discipling, it's a relationship that doesn't end after that 6-month or that 18-month period of us meeting together. It's lifelong, right? Like it is messy and it continues on.
Let me make a point about that too. I have 3 friends that we've been in a discipleship relationship for 20 plus years. And all of them said that there was a phase in their life where if I had not pursued them, they would have let it drop. I don't know if I'm just I'm a boring person to be around or something, but they said, like, one of them was a friend of mine while he was in college. He was obsessed. He was dating and getting through school. And I would call him every week. And he said, if you hadn't pursued that, I don't think we'd have this 25-year relationship. And they were like, thank you for being the irritating one and being the one that kept pursuing this. Cause I'm grateful that we have this now, but I would have been too lazy to keep it up. So my point is this, we tend to choose the path of least resistance, and discipling is not something that's going to, it's not the path of least resistance. It's really the path of most resistance, because you're going to get resistance from people, but you've got to be the one that pursues it. And there's an element of, you can't, what is it? Don't try to teach a pig to sing. It'll irritate you and the pig. But they've got to want it. But there are seasons where people they're going to check out. But if you pursue it, if you feel like that's the person that God's called you to pursue, I would encourage you to pursue it, because I have so many friends that have been 25 plus year friends in my life because I kept up with them in that season. So, yeah.
What's
So-
that use for you?
Well, so can I kind of jump ship a little bit and kind of go another path? So, because you said something that just kind of sparked a thing in my mind. And so, and this may not relate to what you're asking at all, but I think it makes a connection here a little bit. And so, because it is relationship, but it's also, it has to be intentionally, it has to be intentional and strategic about reproducing, or it just becomes a holy huddle, right? And so you want both, right? And so you do maintain those relationships for life, but the context of it or the structure of it somewhat changes, I think. It's the way I see it. So when our very first discipleship group that we started at Crossroads Church was me and 3 other guys. We met every Friday morning at 6 o'clock at a Chick-fil-A Dwarf House in Noonan. And so we would meet every Friday morning. We met for a year, and we got to the end of the year, and we were getting ready to literally change into January. And these 3 guys said, man, we love this. Can we do it again in January? And so I said, well, and I was trying to get off the hook here. And I thought, I don't really want to do this again. Every Friday is my day off in the next year. So I said, here's what we'll do. I said, if you'll go get 3 guys, and you go get 3 guys, and you go get 3 guys, I'll go get 3 guys, and we'll do it again. And they said, okay, we're in. And I went, dang. Why did I do that? And I was like, now what do I got to do? I got to go
More
get 3
work.
guys, man. And so literally they all went, and we went from 4 guys to 16 guys or something like that, 12 guys, went to 12 guys. And then within less than a year, we filled up a whole, you remember Shoney's breakfast bar? So we filled up a whole Shoney's of guys, and then we had to move it to the church, and we ended up over a period of about 4 or 5 years with close to 300 guys that were all in small groups. So we saw multiplication happening right before our very eyes. And those relationships that we started from those 3 guys in that Chick-fil-A are still, a couple of those guys have moved, but one of those guys still in our church today. And I'm as close to him, as I was 30 something years ago, but it has changed because we've been intentional and strategic. He's multiplied lots of groups since then, and I've multiplied lots of groups since then, but our relationship still is. I mean, he's one of my closest friends to this day. So again, that may not be what you're asking.
Looking for practical advice. That's good.
So sometimes the people that disciple you, in your mind's eye, like they turn into, that was the guy that really turned things around for me. And in reality, you've had little bits and pieces of discipleship your whole life from a lot of different people. And it's not like it takes a village, but it kind of is. It's one of those things where when I listen to sermons now, I'm not looking for like stealing a sermon. I'm looking for a reproducible principle that can come alongside the things that the people have poured into me. I'm deeply thankful for the specific men who picked me out and said, "Hey, I want to carry you for a season with me and some other guys so that we can be more effective in the future making disciples in other places." And so sometimes you get sort of an idea that guy's not in the same place as you, but that guy is in the same place as you, trying to learn, trying to reproduce lifestyles of gospel living. That's what Jesus did. Every day he woke up, he was introducing people to a gospel lifestyle, integrated life. And he's designed you. This is the other thing I want to say about the people who've led me. I'm so deeply thankful for them. But the kind of conversations we have now are a little different. Like we can get closer quicker because we've had people pour into us and we can share with each other, quickly. But when we are able to understand that leader for us was somebody God gave us for a season, but that God has uniquely designed you to be specifically who he designed you to be. And so there's this mentality of, I want to be like my mentor. I want to be like my mentor. Well, that's called cloning. So I don't want that to happen for you. And if they stay with me forever, that's called codependency. If they're leaning on me, and maybe I'm codependent and I'm leaning on them. So the reality is, God really does want you to be like Jesus, but God also wants you to be exactly like you. When you get to the gates, I don't think Jesus is going to look at you and say, you should have been more like me. I think sometimes the way we kind of clone people in certain environments, I want you, when Jesus sees you, is, hey, I'm so proud of you because you were exactly who I designed you to be. And so I wanted to say that I don't like idolize my mentors. I'm very thankful for them, but they're different people than I am. So when you get discipled, make sure that you're continuing to be who you are and who God designed you to be.
That's good. That's good. All right, here, we've got less than 15 minutes, okay? So in just a moment, I'm gonna ask if you guys have any questions on the practical side of getting started, or any tools, any questions about tools or resources for these guys. But before we turn them loose on y'all, all right, so when you do turn a group out, when you let them loose, you've been investing in them for whatever period of time, what are the things either that you give them or that you say to them as you prepare them to start their own group? What do you do? Well said.
Okay, I'll jump in. So I start letting people know early in the discipling relationship that I would really love for you to be able to lead a group like this, because number one, it deepens your own understanding of what disciple making is. Number two, you're going to have friends for life that stay with you, that are going to call you when things get tough and when things get tight. And my hope for you is that you'll be leading other people in a contiguous way, so that there's multiple generations of people. And I will always be here and available. I will never not pick up the phone when you call. But I probably won't coach you a whole lot, because a lot of learning how to do this is doing it poorly before you do it well. And it is okay. We don't ever get good at anything unless you're just a super rock star designed to do one. If you're Tom Brady, nobody has to coach you, right? But in reality, we have to do something poorly to get good at doing it. And so I just encourage people, just take a couple of people and some of the things we've done, do together. And kind of we don't really have a curriculum, but what we've banked on is, when we discovered those 8 habits of Jesus, we thought this is a pretty good place for us to start talking about what it means to be a follower of Jesus and a discipler and a disciple maker. So when you find these habits of Jesus and habits of Paul in the New Testament, you just go, okay, that's a good place to start. So if those were their habits, I'm going to try everything I can to get those habits into my life. And so we're not really giving them something, we're trying to transfer something.
I would say one of the things that I tell people all the time, and I tell them this with anything they're setting out to do, is, and I hate this word, but it is the word, figure out what's sustainable for you in your context. Because a lot of people get these grand things they want to do, but it's just not sustainable for where they're at. So, I mean, a simple example of this is when people come to me like, how do you start a podcast? I'm like, you better figure out what's going to work for you as a podcast, long game. Because if you're like, oh, I'm going to interview guests 3 times a week, you're like, well, you got to line up guests 3 times a week. You won't be able to pull that off? No. So one of the things for my dad and I, we figured out that a podcast that works for us is where I just talk to my dad and we don't have guests. So that's our whole podcast, but it's very sustainable because it's something I'm doing naturally. And so if you're going to come up with a system that works for you and say, we're going to meet every morning at 5 a.m. and you've never woken up at 5 a.m. before, I wouldn't be doing a group like that. It may be you're a 9:30 group and you find people that are 9:30 at night group, whatever it is. Do what's sustainable for you. I think that's so important, because we say, well, my mentor I had a pastor that mentored me for a long time, and he wanted to do 5:30 a.m. at the taco place. I sucked it up and went with it, but I'm like, I ain't ever doing 5:30 for me, because I won't be showing up for my discipleship group teams. So what works for you that's sustainable, that it's going to require effort, but it's not going to require a complete radical change of the patterns in your life already, because it won't be sustainable if you do that. So
That margin thing is a big deal. And if you're doing things that you already like to do, just invite people to come along with you on it.
great way to put it.
You're good? Okay. All right. In the last few minutes, do you guys have any final questions? Something that maybe you just haven't had a chance to ask one of these guys yet? Now's your time.
No, never face that. Never.
Did everyone hear the question in the back? How do you address favoritism if that's ever accused in this scenario?
Okay, pretty good deal. Mark 3, Jesus played favorites. He picked 12, and there were 72, there were 120, there were larger crowds, but Jesus set a pattern for, hey, this may not be popular, but Luke 6:12-29, like he stood up in front of his disciples and he picked out 12 in front of them. He did it on purpose. It was like, I want you, not you, Not you, not you, not you, not you, not you, you. I want not you, not you, you. Okay. Champions come up front, losers like, no, I'm just kidding. But if you do the math, if it was the 120 or if it was the 72, then what happened was, my guess is the math works out where if it was 72, they were taking 6 seats on themselves, and he had to create a progressive way for everybody to get it. That's what we say. What we communicate is, we're doing this in a way that eventually everyone will get it. And we prayed about this, and this is where God asked us to start. That's the kind of course, you can tell I'm 55 and I've had that before. So I have a little bit of sting, you know, when I'm able to say that you, not you, not you. So good deal. Anyway.
I mean, you also have the element of, there are people in different, there's a great book called The Critical Journey where they talk about the 6 stages in the life of faith. And you got to recognize too, that there are people in different stages. And so you may have a discipleship group for somebody in a certain one stage that have been follower of Christ a little bit longer is going to look different than a new group, right? And if you've got people complaining about there's not people for this group, I mean, we used to have that at our church. I was an associate, and people would be like, Pastor, we need a small group for people with Peruvian hairless chihuahuas. And I'd be like, okay, well, if you really feel like a call for that, you are the one to start the group. Oh no, Pastor, the church should do it. Well, I don't have a Peruvian hairless chihuahua. I don't understand the struggle. So you need to start that. So if people are complaining, saying, why are you focusing on the younger people? Well, maybe you need to be the one that focuses on the people who are a little bit further along in their faith. You are the one. So I wouldn't, again, say that gently, of course, but like Jesus would say it. Of course, Jesus didn't ever say it. He didn't say everything gently, but anyway.
Good. Anybody else? Now's your chance. Going once?
Yeah. As a matter of fact, usually there's a pretty good way to find your next group. And anytime somebody's interested, people ask me, how do you find the people that you're going to disciple? At some point they find you, you know, they'll find you. And then if you say, hey, listen, right now I'm involved in all that I can do right now. But about 3 months from now, I'll be in a place where I'm ready to go with a new group, and love to do that. So yeah, it's a great idea. Keep track of those people. Somebody else asked, hey, how do you find them? Well, I don't really find them at this point, but they're usually chasing to find it. People that are hungry for it are a lot easier to disciple.
All right, y'all. All right, we got one in the back. Yes, Ted.
We don't. Well, let me go back to that. We do a little bit of that. We have a once a month leadership night called Leadership Community, first Monday night of every month. And actually our small group leader, he recognizes everybody that's starting a new small group. And so he gives them a baton, so pass baton. And so, yeah, he actually does that. We don't do it on the weekend, or we don't do it in front of the whole, but we do it in front of our leadership community. We actually do. Yeah.
Do it every 6 months when we get everybody together in the same place that's been a part of the journey up to this point. And so every 6 months we have a check-in, and we figure if you huddle 6 people, it's hard to mess that up in 6 months. So we can recalibrate when we get together on a leadership night like that, and we communicate the new people that are coming on board. We celebrate that. We don't do it in front of the congregation as a whole, because if they're not involved in that, they wouldn't understand it yet.
Guys, I want to say from the bottom of my heart, thank you, not just for being here this week, but for what you do and making your ministry so transparent and available to all of us and the people that you are ministering to at home. Thank you for what you do, guys. Will y'all join me in thanking these guys for being here?